Hello there and welcome to Career Stories. I'm here today with James Baggott. Hiya, James.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. So as always, please do comment to let us know that you're here, where you're joining from. If you've got any questions, then please feel free to ask them or any general comments. So as I said, welcome, James. Thank you for coming on. So I met James probably a few months ago now. We booked with some interview coaching. And I was really impressed with everything that he's achieved so far in both his study and his work. So I wanted to get him on really just to share that knowledge with people. So the basis for these lives, if you've been watching, this is the 4th episode, and I'm really talking to people that have got interesting careers, what they've been doing, how they've got there, and the aim really is to inspire other people. So James, let's start by talking about your masters. So what was it that you covered and why was that?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in autism in general because, I'm autistic. I know lots of autistic people. So it's the sort of thing where I just kind of wanted to know more about. Ended up chatting to the autism professor about the idea of like emotion recognition. We know that autistic people are worse at recognizing emotions, but most of the research only looked at recognizing emotions through like faces. So you can, like, we know there was a problem, but we don't know if it was a problem with recognizing faces or with recognizing emotions itself.
Okay.
So what we were doing was taking a face emotion recognition task and doing that alongside an audio recognition task where you had these non-verbal utterances of
Okay.
various, like someone screaming for fear kind of thing. And then had kids try and like recognize the emotions and sort of match that up. What we found was like we didn't actually find a difference. We didn't find a deficit in performance for the autistic people, probably because the task was like a little too easy for them. We kind of tweaked it a bit. But we found a really strong correlation in the autistic group alone for all the different tasks, which means that, like, in the typically developing group, how good you are at recognizing audio emotions didn't relate to how good you were at recognizing visual emotions. But in autism, no, like all the different tasks we did, the visual, the audio, really strongly correlated with one another. If you're good at one, you're good at the other. What that means, it looks like, is that whatever is going on with autism, it's not the lower level stuff. It's not like recognizing a face. It's not like your eye movements. It's something higher level that's connected to every aspect of emotion recognition. So like, we're talking about maybe the amygdala, which does like fear processing, might be slightly different. And there seems to be some evidence that that might even be connected to like sensory sensitivities. So like
Right.
some people have a hypersensitive amygdala, so they get more intense negative emotion recognition, whereas others are hyposensitive, so they don't really recognize it as much, and both of those can cause difficulties.
Okay.
It's still very early days in the field, but yeah, it was quite exciting to discover something that new,
Sounds really good. I was reading an article just yesterday about someone who was talking about hyper versus hypo, and that the same person can experience both of those. I clearly am no expert whatsoever, but I've just been starting to read some stuff, so it's interesting to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, it's a pattern. So like you could be hypersensitive with like texture and then hyposensitive to like vision,
Right.
or
Okay.
even like hypersensitive to vision but hyposensitive to like eye contact. Like it
Right.
seems that you
Okay.
can get really granular with it, which is why autistic people are so different.
Right.
Like you can't really generalize with them,
Yes.
which is annoying when you're trying to do research. But
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've just seen a comment coming through from Sue to say, will you have a recording of this? And yes, so it will be on my page pretty much forever, and I can send you a clip also, obviously, if that's helpful. Okay, so moving on from your masters then, so you went on to become a learning support assistant. So what was it that attracted you to that?
Yeah, I mean, I got because I ended up working at the school I actually went to, and like I got a bit of support when I was there, but I really felt like um, there was some key components kind of missing out on that. Like most of the help I got was like through exams where I didn't really need the support, rather than like teaching me about the conditions that I had. Like I actually had to do all my own research on that, which made it harder to understand what was going on with myself. Um, so in a way, it was that kind of like I wanted to give back, right? Like I wanted to kind of go, oh, these kids are like me. I can do for them what I wish I had growing up. Um, Alongside just mental health support, trying to teach them how to like revise and focus and everything. Um, Plus, it was a way to take like I'd spent a year and a change doing all this academic research, and I wanted to put it to use.
Okay.
Like, I learned so much about like autistic kids and all these different nuances, and this seemed like a good way to actually take what I've learned and use it day to day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. Okay. So I've got a comment from Jeff. So Jeff's from America. So he's saying, very interesting topic. Good morning. Namaste. So thanks for joining us, Jeff. Okay. So moving on a bit from the LSA. So what were some of the key things that you did? I know we talked about this and it was really interesting, some of the groups that you set up, etc. Do you want to just talk a bit about what you did for your students and your colleagues?
Yeah, I mean the sheer kind of variety of it is it'll take 20 minutes just to cover all of it. Like I ended up teaching A level to cover a gap in the scheduling, because obviously I was unqualified, like I didn't have the teacher qualification, but I still had the masters and everything in psychology. Um, and then I did like classroom support, everything from year seven sort of bottom set, struggling to read and write, to like top set year 11, all the granular bits of biology and helping them, like just trying to help them focus and teach them what I knew about it. Outside of that, I did a lot of one-on-one support. So some of that, like usually like autistic kids, ADHD kids, a lot of kids with anxiety. Um, so like it was very personalized, I guess is probably the best way of saying it. Like, if I had a kid with ADHD, we'd focus more on like, okay, here's how you can focus in class, here's how we can manage this, and try and almost big them up. Because with ADHD, you have they seem to almost internalize people telling them off quite quickly and think of themselves as a naughty kid, which then means they don't want to focus. So it's trying to encourage them that they can do this so they then feel more able to try. Um, Alongside, again, like mental health support, and a lot of like one-to-one catch-up lessons, like teaching the kids sometimes even to read. Um, yeah, outside of that, I also ran these training sessions where I kind of took everything I'd learned from my masters and just reading outside of it, and tried to teach the other LSAs of my colleagues on what it was like to be autistic, trying to combine the academic with what it actually feels like day to day, which is there's a lot of writing about autism from an academic point of view and autism from a like lived experience point of view, but they rarely intermesh. So it was trying to make those two things talk, which I then obviously repurposed a lot of those to the articles that I've been writing.
Yeah, really good. So teaching A level, that seems quite a big thing for someone who probably wasn't that much older than the kids he was teaching.
Yeah, it was pretty weird. I had 2 weeks of prep where they just kind of went, okay, cover this section, go. And luckily it was areas I already knew.
Yeah.
But it was, I was thrown into the deep end, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, seemed to do all right though.
That's
None
cool.
of the kids failed too horribly.
Well, that's good. But and was you able to cope with that? Was that enough time for you to kind of feel ready for it?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, I kind of thrived off how little time I actually had. It really forced me to just get engaged and get it going. And
Yeah.
psychology is an area I'm very passionate about, so it wasn't hard to kind of communicate that passion to them,
Yeah.
even if I was writing the lesson. I was only sort of one lesson ahead of them at any one time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't bad,
Fresh in
especially
your
because
mind.
yeah, I was teaching alongside my old psychology teacher, which was a wild experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think the school you were at did have quite a few people of your kind of age, didn't they, as learning support assistants?
yeah. It's mostly mostly sort of early 20s, and then the mums essentially
Yeah.
tended to be the split
Yeah.
between.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, we've got a question here from Jeff saying, what is your advice on how to approach this type of training, James? So I'm guessing he's talking about the training that you did for your colleagues. So
Mm,
and doing the kind of the mesh, like you said, about the lived experience.
mm.
So have you got any advice
So
there?
yeah, I mean, for me personally, it was I always used the lived experience as the sort of compass of like, this is what I'm going to talk about. And then we're trying to explain why that might be the case. So, sort of use the lived experience as the hook, trying to get people to sort of empathize with what it feels like. And then using whatever like weird metaphors, jokes that I needed to kind of almost slip that empathy in. Um, so, making jokes. A lot of autistic people refer to it as like the mental equivalent of being left-handed,
Right.
because left-handedness doesn't actually make you any worse of a person. Like, it doesn't make you worse at doing activities. But when the whole world assumes you're right-handed, you're gonna struggle if you're left-handed. So with autism, the whole world is kind of set up assuming you are typically developing, you're not autistic.
Yeah.
So then when you go into it with an autistic mindset, there's that clash. So I pointed at someone, and said, "You're left-handed, aren't you?" And then just started like talking about how they're clearly a worse person because they can't use right-handed scissors. And then once the sort of joke had reached its point, I then almost pulled back the curtain and went, "This is what it's like to be autistic."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kind of starting in that, trying to make people entertained almost first, and then trying to sneak the learning in where I can.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I've been doing a fair bit of reading recently, and I was talking to someone who was saying that maybe people should be thinking about autism as a personality type rather
Mm,
than something. And I think the moving it from disorder to condition, it seems
mm,
to be kind of moving along. But even she was saying she doesn't even like the word condition. But yeah, it's really interesting when you start talking about it. But she used the example of, you've got extroversion, introversion. Maybe that there is another way of looking at it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jeff's
Um,
come back here saying laughter does help people learn, for sure, definitely.
mm. Yeah, it's like, well, when people say like, "Oh, everyone's a bit autistic," it's a little bit of a misnomer. A lot of people do have autistic traits. It is a continuum.
Yeah.
So while most people are sort of what we call subclinical, so they're not they wouldn't be diagnosed as autistic. They might have some of those elements and would maybe benefit from that increased accessibility, right?
Mm,
Like, I know people who aren't autistic who regularly benefit from the sort of things that are set up to help autistic people, like fidget cubes.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
No, that's a good point.
mm,
Just seeing another comment's just come through. Okay, so John, also from America. So John's saying, love that left-handed analogy. And I think that's the thing, is that you don't think about things like that. So it's really good.
mm,
Okay, so moving on, we talked a bit before about a PhD and you possibly doing a PhD. So what do you think your research, well, what would your
mm,
research area be? Why is that of interest? And then
mm.
what are you thinking of after that?
So I tend to be focused more on cognitive psychology, like focusing on the sort of software rather than the hardware. Um, Ideally in autism, neurodiversity, but I've I have applied to PhDs that are more in the vein of like, empathy, mental health, memory, emotion recognition, like focusing on the systems and processes of the brain. And I think things like autism and ADHD are useful because they show a different state that the brain can be in. So you can then compare and learn more about both groups by comparing and contrasting how they approach these different areas. Specifically, if I had my dream, I can do whatever. Hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity, as I kind of mentioned earlier, they don't get talked about anywhere near as much as they sort of should be. They are probably one of the biggest parts of autistic life, and they're barely relevant in most autistic literature. Like it rarely comes up, and I think it might be the underpinning of a lot more than we sort of give it credit for. Like I mentioned with the amygdala, like emotion recognition maybe could connect to these same things. And the idea that some people can be super good in some areas and super weak in other areas, that's basically like a hypersensitivity, just for like a mental process rather than a sense. It's that same sort of either really good or really bad. I don't know. I think there's something there, and I need people to do research, and ideally it's me, because then I get paid to do it.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. And after that, the main reason I want to do this is I obviously love finding out bits and pieces. I love like almost tinkering with the system, finding out how it works, and I love teaching. So ideally, I end up sort of, working at a university, giving lectures, doing research, kind of being able to touch on both those aspects of, I guess, my personality. Because the only thing I love more than learning things is telling anyone who will listen about what I've just learned. So yeah, it's a good thing to have together.
That's cool, and it's really, really interesting. So I'm sure. Well, I really hope that something comes up soon for you. And as you just mentioned, senses, actually a slight detour. I was in a book club recently. We read a book which is all about the senses, and it says that there's 32 senses, not just 5. So that book, what I found, was a bit too sciencey for me. But if you've not read it, I think you might like that. So I'll send you a link.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds good. Yeah, we never think about hunger is technically a sense, right? Your sense of balance, your like body sense, and all of it can be slightly altered and different for you, for someone else. And how do you communicate that if you don't know that your sense of hunger is different to mine? How do you learn that?
Yeah.
How do you know that it's different? So it's tricky.
I found the really interesting one's all about colour, saying that some cultures don't even have differentiators between blue and green, whereas others have hundreds of words for all the different blues that you can have. So
yeah. And if you've got a different word, like Russian has light blue and dark blue, there's two different distinct words. They're better at recognizing the difference between light blue and dark blue than we are.
Right.
Because we lack the words, so our brains don't separate them as easily.
Okay.
Which is just wild that language can sort of underpin so much of that.
Totally. Well, I'll definitely send you the book. Okay, so do you consciously think about your values when you're looking for an organisation to work for, or I guess related to your PhD as well? So
yeah. I mean, I kind of have to a degree. Like, if it's very clear, like a lot of autism charities, right, that might be on the surface quite good to work for. Like Autism Speaks is one of the biggest autism charities. They're considered a hate group by some autistic writers because they're actively trying to find a cure, and they don't have any members of any autistic people on their board. Like, it's this huge sort of culture clash between the two groups. So like, I've got to be very careful, and even some kind of therapies. that are like recommended by I don't know if they're recommended so much by the NHS, but they're definitely it's ABA like behavioral therapies is like again some have argued is considered torture, and like it technically can help the kid, but it also drastically increases their chance of developing PTSD.
Right.
So like there were jobs where I had to turn it down because it was like, it paid well, it was in the field I'm interested in, but it looked like they were doing therapies that I believed to be harmful to the kids. And then with the PhDs, I've had to be so careful with like, there was one on the ethics of AI research that on further inspection was sponsored by a company who makes military drones. So,
Wow.
It's yeah, maybe would have found it easier to get a job if I kind of got rid of my morals a little bit.
No, I think everyone I've spoken to so far, I've asked a similar question to everyone so far, and I think the common factor is it is really important, because otherwise you're going to end up in a job that you hate, and whilst it might take longer, eventually once it comes, you know that it's going to be the right move for you.
Yeah, definitely.
So going on from that, then so we've talked about possibly going for a PhD, but you are looking for work at the moment. So what sort of work is it you're looking for?
Yeah, so my time is kind of split between applying for funded PhDs where they pay me to do it, and like alongside that, I would also be teaching at like 20 students or so, doing like a workshop kind of thing, not giving full lectures, at least at first. Outside of that kind of academia sphere, a lot of like science communication stuff. So I applied for like some jobs at the Science Museum, to be one of the explainer people who like does the shows, kind of teaches the public.
Okay.
And like science writing, like in general, that kind of teaching area. But I don't want to be a teacher to a secondary school classroom,
Okay.
Which has made things a little more difficult for me. But
Yeah. So more kind of, like you say, in a museum, so more sort of extracurricular type stuff when people are coming to you for an event type thing rather than you being in an education environment.
yeah, and like the training I did for my colleagues, like I'd love to do more of that kind of thing, and that was really enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's just I don't want to teach teenagers who don't want to be there, to be honest.
Who does? Yeah.
Like, I can't think of anything worse than, well, I can think of many things worse, but like I don't think it's the right fit for me.
Yeah, I guess
Um,
with someone like you who's so passionate about learning, it must be quite hard to then have a group of people that are not passionate about learning.
yeah, it's more work, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
hmm.
Okay. So whilst you've been job hunting, I know you've been doing some other stuff. So do you want to talk a bit about what you've been doing outside of the job hunting and the applying for PhDs?
Yeah, so I've set up tutoring to try and get some like sort of side income coming in. It's not enough to pay the bills, but it's just kind of keeps me going for a bit longer. I'm currently editing my master's thesis to try and get it published, which means cutting it down from 13,000 words to 6,000. But we're making progress.
Wow.
um, Outside of that, obviously, I've been writing all these articles for LinkedIn, taking this kind of, various training things I've done over the years, rewriting them, doing my own research. Just it's a way to keep my brain sharp as well as kind of improve my writing skills in general.
Yeah.
And then, I'm still learning Spanish, using like Duolingo and everything, trying to keep that going. I've been over pretty much since uni, but especially since COVID. I've been teaching myself to code
Okay.
because it's a very useful skill to have, in any situation. but it also like it's a good creative outlet because I can make games and try and like try and express ideas through this interactive medium. I've also set up, it hasn't started yet, but I've volunteered to run a code club at the local library,
Oh, okay.
teaching that coding, and maybe like, doing more general volunteering stuff
Yeah.
around there. So stuff to keep me busy.
Yeah, no, that's good. And the thing with volunteering, I've talked about this loads of times before, you never know where it's going to lead. So
Mm,
my husband started volunteering at a local museum, and now he works there doing social media. So,
mm,
you never
mm,
know. That's the thing. Once you get into somewhere, obviously there might be a cost and time implication for you
mm,
initially, but
mm.
who knows? So you mentioned games then. So what kind of games have you developed or are interested in developing?
God. I I tend to like making short, little, weird ideas.
Okay.
Um, like the idea is to just get it done, get it complete, because I think it's a very valuable skill to like finishing a thing is a really tough skill, and you've got to
Right.
learn it.
Yeah.
So the idea of these is not just make a thing; it's make a thing, get it polished, get it complete. Um, and then put it out there, so that people can actually see it. Because a half-finished project that no one gets to see, it doesn't matter how good it is, because it doesn't really exist at that stage.
Yeah.
And trying to solve all the problems. Like I put out a chess sort of type of game,
Okay.
and people were saying like they loved it, but they wished there was like a computer to play against.
Right.
So now I had the problem of, okay, how do you make a chess computer? Like, how do you make an AI that can play chess? But then once learning that, I had to go, okay, how do I make a robot that can play a game that I made better than me? As it was a complicated time,
Wow.
definitely, but I
Yeah.
learned a lot doing it,
Yeah.
and now I can kind of take that elsewhere,
Yeah.
which is useful.
Yeah. That's really good. Okay, so final question, which is, and I know you said you're not sure how you can answer this because you're looking for work yourself, but any tips for people who are neurodiverse in getting into work?
Yeah, I mean, I've personally found it helpful to read what other neurodiverse people have to say about it, and just about life in general. I'm always like, you know, you hear something small and go, oh, that thing I've been doing isn't a normal thing that everyone does. That's a specific thing for me. That's good to know. And then you can, once you know more about yourself, you can start trying to like find things to kind of help you live your life, right?
Mm,
Um, I've also had the benefit of a lot of people around me. Their job is to be very good at networking, and that like people side of business, which I am terrible at. So like you,
mm.
my dad, and even like my godfather are all like in this field. So you've all managed to give me some very useful advice. Try and build up that weakness of how much I hate networking and making small talk, and
Yeah,
trying to sort of force myself to get better at it, force myself to get good at these areas,
yeah,
and it has paid off already.
yeah, yeah,
Definitely got a lot more interest because of that.
yeah. And I think using LinkedIn is a really good step into networking, is it? Because you can do some advanced searching, find the people that are going to be useful for you in your job
Mm,
search, and kind
mm,
of talk to them that way, and comment on their articles, and then hopefully they'll comment on yours, that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, and it's that kind of thing of like the articles are functionally like to help me to improve my writing. They're also like a little advertisement for me, right at
Mm.
their heart.
Yeah,
Um, but it's nice to know. I've had people come up to me and said like, "Oh, I really enjoyed your article. I learned a lot about this thing," and it's a nice kind of side effect of, "Oh yeah, I just did this to get hired, but I'm also getting people actually interested. I'm actually teaching people and helping out."
Yeah, no, your articles are
It's
excellent,
useful.
James. I really like the one about meltdowns and shutdowns. It was new terminology for me, but I learnt a lot from
Mm,
reading that. It's really helpful. So
mm.
I would just encourage anyone that's watching to make sure you do comment on James's articles because that will help them get spread further. And I think you were approached as well for about writing articles for someone else as well, were you?
Yeah. It's still in the process of, we're still
Yeah,
setting it all up. But the idea
yeah,
would be that I write about neurodivergence for them in a sort of professional manner,
yeah,
which, yeah, is exciting. I'd love to do that.
yeah,
I could definitely see myself sort of end up in the science writing field
yeah,
that I sort of accidentally found myself in.
yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Excellent. Okay, well, we are about out of time. So anyone that's been watching, I can see there have been a fair few people watching. So please do add any comments. Paul there is saying your articles have been really useful, James. So thank you for that, Paul. So anyone that's got any other questions that's watching watching later on catch up, please do ask your questions anyway, and we will go back to answer them later. So thank you again, James, for coming on, and thank you to everyone that's watching either now or later. For future shows, as I've said before, I'll be talking to people who are experiencing their careers, who've made dramatic career changes. Got slots booked up until February. I'm going to be back in January with Mark Deek. So Mark is a piano expert, so he teaches piano online. So that's going to be really interesting talking to him. I've just got another comment through from Jeff saying showing your knowledge and sharing your expertise is an excellent approach, James. So that seems like a great comment to leave on. So thank you, Jeff. Thanks again, James, and I will see you all after Christmas. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.